Winter Danger, Chapter 6. "That there is the all-fired, hottest fire ever I seen," exclaimed Jared indignantly. He shoved his stool further back in the corner to get away from the heat. Caje glanced at his father out of the corner of his eye. Jared was pulling uncomfortably at his shirt, and his face was as red as black gum leaves in the fall. It was a hot fire, and the cabin was close and stuffy. But Caje couldn't get enough of the heat. He sat close to the hearth, even when the sweat sprang out on his face and rolled down his cheeks. Uncle Adam laughed. "You'll be glad enough for a little of this fire when you get up in the loft to sleep," he spoke. "Don't pay no attention to Adam, Jared," Aunt Jess said from the other side of the room, where she was putting away on a shelf the wooden trenchers and horn spoons. Her daughter, Dorcas, knelt by the hearth with a piggin of hot water, scrubbing the bowls. Dorcas was the oldest of the Tadlock children, a young lady of 15, slim and pretty with her brown hair tied in a blue ribbon. "I got plenty of coverlids," Aunt Jess went on, turning around and opening a chest in the back. She began to pull out quilts. "When you all get ready for bed, take these up with you." Sam Tadlock, who was 10, glanced up from the leather whang he was threading through his moccasins. "Them quilts won't do 'em no good," he said. "Bird takes all the kiver in sight, just like it all was his'n." Bird grinned good-naturedly. He was a tall boy, 2 years older than Caje. "You ain't froze yet," he told his brother. Caje started to tell his aunt not to go to any trouble, that he and Jared weren't used to quilts and covers. But he didn't. Somehow he didn't want Aunt Jess to know he'd had to sleep on the ground with only a bearskin for cover during this cold. He stretched out his hands toward the fire, remembering those nights. Aunt Jess came up and blew out the candle on the fireboard. "I never had time to make a heap of candles this fall." She smiled down at Caje and said, "I reckon firelight is best to talk by, anyhow." She bent and peered at Cage's shirt, then exclaimed, "Why, Caje, that looks like blood on your shirt, by that torn place. You been shot?" Caje turned his hurt shoulder quickly away from his aunt's gaze, but she seized his arm and examined the place. "My soul! Who shot this here boy, Jared?" she asked, turning to Jared accusingly. "Chickamaugas," answered Jared shortly. He didn't say anything more. "You never took the boy down in Injun country!" she exclaimed loudly. "Now, Jess," soothed Uncle Adam, "you let Jared tote his own water." "He's 11-year-old," Jared said with a shrug. "He can handle a tomahawk and a rifle good as a man." Caje saw Bird and Sam stare at him with more interest than they had shown since he got there. Bird grinned when he caught Cage's eye, but Sam scowled into the fire. Jared went on loudly, "Every place I go, I figure he can go. It ain't like I had anybody to leave him with." "Why, he's got folks," replied Uncle Adam. "He's my own sister's child. He's welcome here." Then he added hastily, "You're both welcome to stay." Jared pulled at his beard and answered softly, "I ain't of a mind what we'll do. Me and Caje got a going foot. If'n we do stay, we'll earn our keep. We won't put you out none at all. There's a hard winter ahead. We seen signs of plenty back in Injun country." He began to tell about the squirrels going south. While he talked, Caje stared around him. This was a good cabin. The logs were well chinked. The floor was no dirt floor, but covered with wide puncheons fitted tight together. The roof wouldn't leak. The wind wouldn't howl through the cracks here. The bed in the corner was piled high with quilts, just as his and Pa's would be tonight. He thought about the good supper he'd eaten, deer meat and ash cake, squirrel stew, and preserves made of plums and honey. Caje had eaten all he could hold, and still Aunt Jess had urged him to have another collop of meat, another bowl of buttermilk. He reckoned she didn't know he'd not drunk milk but twice before in his life that he could remember. But it was powerful good and tasty. He wished he could have eaten more. And tonight he and his pa would sleep in the loft like decent folks, not curled up in a hollow log like wild things. But would they spend the whole winter here? Uncle Adam had as good as asked them. Caje sighed. Maybe Jared would like it better as the days passed. You boys get some wood and mend the fire, Uncle Adam said, going up to the hearth and kicking at a half-burned log. Sparks danced up the chimney. Let Bird get it, protested Sam. I brung in all that wood afore the supper meal, and about 100 piggins of water, I reckon. Bird reached over the table and seized Sam by the ear. They went out together, with Sam squealing at every step. Caje wondered if he ought to go too, but he didn't know whether it was manners for company to fetch in wood, like the fire wasn't hot enough to suit him. It's snowing hard, Uncle Adam said as the door closed behind the boys. Don't you let me hear about you running out in that snow barefooted tomorrow, Marthy, he went on, speaking to the youngest Tadlock. Martha sat on a bench playing with her doll. She had been so quiet that Caje had forgotten about her, but then she'd hardly done more than say hello to him since he'd gotten there. Uncle Adam sat back down on his split oak bottom chair. Marthy's lost her moccasins 2-3 days back, he explained to Jared. Went walking on the creek and broke through the ice and lost both of 'em. There's times when I think she was behind the door when the brains was passed out. Martha did not raise her yellow head, but went on playing with her doll while her father smiled at her. Finally, she slipped off the bench and came to stand by Caje. This here's Matildy, she said. She ain't got no moccasins. Lost 'em in the branch 2-3 days back. I reckon she was behind the door when the brains was passed out. Caje grinned and Uncle Adam rocked with laughter, but Martha didn't smile. She's a pretty dolly, said Caje finally. The doll was carved of cedar and dressed in tattered corn shucks tied around her with a thong. Did your pappy carve it for you? Nah, Bird made her, Martha answered. Mammy's cut me out some moccasins and she'll get 'em sewed up as soon as she ever has time, and then I'll show you the holler button tree where me and Matildy live. I mean, we play like we live there. The door flew open and Bird and Sam came in, pushing and shoving at a big log. The cold air swirled in with them, smelling sweet and fresh. A dog slipped in and ran happily across the room to sit in front of the fireplace. Get that fool hound out of the way, grunted Bird. Caje pulled the dog to one side, because it was all he knew how to do to help. The dog's ears were as soft as beaver. Uncle Adam helped the boys, and they rolled the log into the fireplace. Thar, Uncle Adam gave it a final poke. That'll hold us the night, I reckon. The next morning, snow lay deep on the ground. Caje looked out the door, his breath making a little cloud in front of him. Things seemed different, all smooth and white. He'd never have taken it for the same place. The ground lay so clean and rounded before him. Little walls of snow stood up along the branches of the trees, and the trunks were white all down the north side where the wind had drifted the flakes against them. Uncle Adam, Dorcas, Sam, and Bird had gone to the cowshed to milk and feed the stock. Caje could see their tracks across the snow. He reckoned he ought to go with them, but he didn't know a lick about tending cows and horses. He'd hinder more than he'd help. But there was water to fetch and firewood to bring in. He grabbed up a piggin and ran out in the snow. He slid down the hillside to the spring and broke the ice to fill the bucket. It had been easy getting down, but it was hard work getting back up the slope with the piggin full of water. He made the trip 4 times and filled the big kettle for his aunt. He was just toting in a last armful of firewood when his cousins came back from the barn. Now looky there, Sam, Aunt Jess pointed out. Caje has done all your chores for you. I don't know when I've had such a heap of firewood. Sam glowered at his cousin. Caje turned away. I reckon he wanted to slide up and down that hill and fetch the water hisself the way he looks, Caje told himself. Well, you're going to need firewood aplenty this day, cold as it is, said Uncle Adam. I'm fixing to snake up some more logs from the new ground. It's powerful cold to snake logs, Pappy, said Sam hastily. Ain't it, Bird? So cold the snow's turned blue, teased Bird. Likely it'll be so cold tomorrow the kivers will freeze over the beds, and Sam can lay abed the livelong day." "You'll freeze for a fact without firewood," said Uncle Adam sternly. "We'll snake up the logs today, and I don't want no more foolishment." After breakfast, Jared took his rifle from beside the hearth and looked it over carefully. "I'll get you some fresh meat today," he said finally. Uncle Adam was putting on his match coat. "Fresh meat would be welcome," he answered politely. "I seen a turkey flying along the creek this morning." Jared nodded. He gathered up his belongings, walked to the door, and flung it open. The cold air rushed past him. He turned and looked back at all of them. You could almost hear him say he needed no match coat, no hot, close cabin, no pot of stew bubbling on the fire. "He hates all them Tadlocks," thought Caje suddenly, "and I reckon they don't hold him too dear." Jared stepped out and the door banged to. "You got on enough clothes, Caje?" Aunt Jess asked, looking at him up and down. "Yes, ma'am," answered Caje. He wore all he had in the world. He was embarrassed with all the Tadlocks standing there looking at him. He moved over toward his rifle and picked it up and felt better. "This ain't Chickamauga country," laughed Bird. "A rifle'll only be in the way. Come on." "You got on stockings?" Aunt Jess asked, peering sharply at his moccasins. Caje hesitated. He had never owned a pair of stockings in his life. He and Pa always stuffed moss and leaves in their shoes in the wintertime to keep the ground chill out. But no matter how many leaves they used, the cold got into their feet. He wiggled his toes around in his moccasins, wondering how stockings would feel. At last he mumbled, "No, ma'am." "I thought not," said Aunt Jess. "Men folks need women to look after them." She gave Caje a pair of wool stockings to wear, and then wrapped a piece of flannel around his chest to keep out the cold. Caje thanked his aunt and joined his cousins, feeling queer with so many clothes on. He wished all these folks wouldn't stand around staring at him like he was a five-legged hop-toad. The four of them trooped out to the cowshed. It was a rough log building, and no mud chinking kept the wind out there, but hay was piled against the north side. The cow and heifer turned curious eyes on them as they came in, and the horse blew a loud greeting through his nostrils. Bird got down the collar and traces. "Brit's as bad as Sam. He don't care a dern about working," laughed Bird. "Help me get the collar on him." Caje stood still a minute in surprise. Didn't Bird know he didn't know anything about horses and their gear? Was Bird making fun of him for being a woodsy? He turned away as if he hadn't heard. Bird shot him a glance, but he didn't ask again. Out of the corner of his eye, Caje watched his cousin as he slipped the collar over Brit's neck and fastened the traces. "It ain't hard," he told himself. "I can do that. Next time I will." All that day and the next two they worked, hauling the great logs up to the house. Caje helped all he could. He was glad he was a good hand at chopping. He could out-chop Bird, but it was hard sometimes to keep on chopping when Bird and Sam got to cutting up and pushing each other around. It was so cold they had to build a fire down in the new ground. The brothers stood around it and joked and told tales. Even Uncle Adam would come to get warm and laugh with the boys. When his uncle quit work, Caje would drop his axe and stand by the fire, too. He couldn't make himself join in the joking and fun, but he could laugh at the other two. The hound kept as close to the fire as he could without getting singed. "Get out the way, Springer," complained Sam. "I reckon you ain't good for nothing but lying by the fire. How come you don't chase a rabbit?" "You're the one to blame if he don't," said Bird. "You and Marthy always feeding him." "I've heard tell a good way to hunt rabbits in the wintertime," said Uncle Adam. "You stick a torch up in the snow, or leave a lantern setting somewhere, and the rabbits come up to look at it. The bright light makes their eyes water so bad they freeze to the ground, and next morning you can just come out and pick up the big ones and leave the little ones to grow a spell longer." The boys whooped with laughter. Caje went back to work with a light heart. But later in the day, he saw Jared come out of the woods and stand on the edge of the newly cleared field, staring at them. His paw looked strange, standing there on the white snow, cradling his rifle in his arm. He never smiled or waved, just stood gazing out of his gaunt, dark face. Jared was restless. Caje could feel it. His pa didn't like these Tadlocks. He didn't like taking things from them. He'd brought in fresh meat for 2 days, but game would get scarce if this cold kept up. There'd be days soon when all Jared could do was sit by the fire and eat the Tadlock's ash bread. He'd never lend a hand with the farm tasks, Caje knew. We'll have to leave, Caje thought hopelessly. He won't stay after the game gives out. We'll have to hole up in a cave or a holler tree somewhere. The next morning at breakfast, Uncle Adam said to Jared, "Your boy Caje here is a good worker. I wish I'd had him last spring around planting time. Bird got down sick, and Sam got a cane stab in his foot. I was working from sun up to sundown, trying to get the plowing done and the corn in. Dorcas tried to help, but she ain't strong enough to be much good. I didn't get all I wanted planted, but my neighbor, Henry Renfro, he helped me a heap when we made a pretty good crop." "You mean you let some stranger help?" Jared stared angrily around the table. He pushed his empty bowl from him. "I wouldn't have done it. I'd have done without my crop before I'd be beholden to a neighbor." The Tadlocks stared at Jared. It was plain they didn't know what he meant. Dorcas began to collect the bowls, and Aunt Jess said politely, "I put some turkey fat in that gourd, Jared. You can grease your moccasins." "Thanky," said Jared gruffly. He stood up, pulling at his beard. "I didn't have it in mind to go hunting this morning. I cracked my rifle stock, and I aimed to fit me a new one." Bird spoke up. "I got a fine piece of maple would make a good stock. I'll give you that. Do you want it?" "I don't want it," Jared answered quickly. Then he added more gently, "I thank ye, Bird, but I'd rather have a walnut stock, and I got me a good piece." There was an awkward silence. Jared turned away to pick up his rifle, and the others began to get ready for the day's work. Caje squatted by the hearth to pull on his stockings. He could feel Jared looking at him. Finally, his father spoke. "I'll give you a couple of rabbit skins to wrap around your feet. They'll keep you warmer than them fool things." Caje tugged at the cord of his moccasin. He knew, all of a sudden, what his father meant. He was aiming to leave, maybe this very day. And when they left, Jared meant to leave everything Tadlock behind. The warm stockings, the flannel around Cage's middle, everything but the food they'd eaten, and that he'd paid for in game. Caje was silent as they went into the barn. He didn't offer to help harness Britt. There wasn't any use him trying to learn farm ways now. "I'm a-going to rive out some clapboards today. One of you boys, run get the gluts out of the lean-to," Uncle Adam said as he picked up the corn shuck harness. "I'll go," Caje said quickly, and set off to the cabin. When he went in, Jared sat in a corner whittling his stock. Caje could tell by the way Aunt Jess's mouth was set she didn't like shavings on her newly swept floor. He went into the lean-to room and grabbed up the wooden wedges and left the cabin without stopping to speak. He slithered over the new fall of snow toward the barn. The air was so cold it seemed to crackle in his ears, and the cloudy sky wasn't gray, but a cold blue. At the cowshed, he paused a minute, thinking about Jared and wondering what he could say to him to make him change his mind about going on. From inside, Sam's voice suddenly rang out shrill. "I wouldn't want to take my bread in idleness." "Jared ain't lazy," Adam answered. "He just looks at things different from what we do. He's a woodsy, and he can't change. He don't know nothing about farming, and he never will." "Well, what about Caje?" Sam demanded. "He ain't worth much on a farm neither, and he eats as much as every two of us. He's a liar, too. I reckon he ain't never been down in Injun country or hunted buffalo like he lays claim to. He ain't—" "That'll do, Sam." Uncle Adam raised his voice. "I don't want to hear no more. Caje is my own blood kin, and as long as Jared wants to stay here, they'll stay." Caje backed up a little and slid down the slope to the cowshed again. This time he made a whistling noise with his teeth so they would hear him coming. He came on in and handed the wooden gluts to his uncle. He shot a look at Sam as they started toward the new ground, but Sam was playing with the dogs and didn't pay him any mind. He won't be bothered with me long, thought Caje. I won't be eating his deer meat but a few more times. But it didn't make him feel any better to know Sam wanted him to leave. It was enough to make his heart crack in two pieces to think he'd come so near spending the winter in the cabin, and now he had to leave. Well, he'd do his best for the Tadlocks this last day to show Uncle Adam he had been obliged for the lodging he'd had, for the warmth of the fire and the bright coverlets on his loft bed, for the sweet ash cakes and the meat flavored with salt and herbs. Later in the morning, Caje looked up as he followed the horse toward the cabin, trying to guide the great log up the hillside. There was a figure going along the edge of the woods. It was Jared. He'd made quick work of the stock, and now he'd set out to hunt. He moved in among the tree trunks and disappeared. When they pulled the last great log up the hill to the house, the day was over. A little pale new moon glimmered in the western sky. Caje was glad the work was done. He was tired and cold, but he had a warm fire and a good meal to look forward to. Jared was not yet back when they went in the cabin. Caje stood to one side of the hearth, watching Dorcas stir the mush as she talked to Martha. Aunt Jess was getting after Bird because he'd not carved her the new trencher she wanted, and Uncle Adam was teasing Sam because he had come up to the house half an hour before everybody else. All at once, Caje felt so lonesome and left out he could hardly bear it. He wished Jared would come in. Gruff and peevish as Jared was apt to be, to have him here was better than to stand in the circle of firelight all alone, without a soul to call your name. He turned quickly and climbed the ladder into the loft. It was dark up there, and a heap colder than it was down in the cabin, but Caje groped his way over to the pile of quilts on which he slept. He put out his hand and touched something soft. He picked it up. It was 2 rabbit skins, cured as soft as milkweed down. He stood staring into the corner of the loft. Jared had left him. He had gone, and he didn't aim to come back.